The night was quiet on Earth, but high above the planet, the great listening station did not sleep. Every second, it captured voices of the stars, whispers of faraway galaxies, and the silent music of space. Most signals were just noise, empty waves that had traveled for millions of years, but on this night, something different arrived. A young operator sat in the control room drinking his coffee and watching the blinking lights. He was tired, his shift almost over. But then, one light turned red. The computer beeped in warning. The screen showed strange patterns, like broken words, like someone trying to speak. The operator frowned, leaned closer, and pressed the record button. At first, it was only static, a rush of sound like a storm in the ocean. But then a voice came through, soft, trembling, not human but full of sorrow. The words were broken but clear enough to shake his heart. Adopt my children. End my loneliness. Human. The coffee cup slipped from his hand and crashed to the floor. He could not believe what he had heard. The room grew cold, as if space itself had entered the station. He replayed the message again and again. Each time the voice sounded more desperate, more human in its sadness. Within hours, the news spread to the highest levels of government. Scientists gathered in secret rooms, replaying the signal, testing it, breaking it into pieces. They all agreed it was no accident, no echo, no star noise. It was a real message sent with purpose, sent with pain, but from where? Astronomers studied the waves, tracing the direction. It came from a star system far away, a system with broken planets and a history of war. The files said the place was dead, empty, a graveyard in the sky. And yet, here was a living voice begging for help. Debate began at once. Some leaders feared a trap, an alien trick to draw humans into danger. Others whisper, Ed, that it might be the greatest chance in human history, a chance to meet another soul across the stars. But one man listened longer than the rest. He was not a leader, not a famous scientist, just a traveler, a pilot with a quiet heart. He sat in the corner of the room listening to the same broken voice, and he felt something the others did not. He felt her loneliness. The message played again, the words heavy with sorrow. Adopt my children. Human. He closed his eyes and saw an image in his mind. A mother, sitting alone in the ruins of a world, her children hiding behind her, her eyes full of tears. She was alien, yes, but her pain was something he knew too well. The pain of losing, the pain of being left behind. The pilot had once lost his family in an accident. He had carried the weight of silence for years. But now this voice from the stars pulled at the wound inside him. It was not just a signal, it was a mirror. The leaders argued, the scientists measured, the soldiers prepared. But the pilot whispered to himself, if she is real, then she needs us, and maybe I need her too. Outside the station, the world did not know. People laughed, worked, lived their small lives, unaware that in the deep silence of space, someone far away was crying. The Earth had always looked at the stars with curiosity. Now the stars were looking back, with sorrow, with hope, and the message did not stop. Every hour, the signal returned, the same trembling plea. Each time, the words seemed heavier, as if the speaker was losing strength. Time was running out. The pilot stood at the window of the station, staring at the night sky. The stars shone like cold diamonds. Somewhere out there, across light years, a widow begged for her children. Somewhere out there, loneliness was waiting for a human answer. The pilot knew. His life would never be the same again. The strange signal had entered not just the machines but his heart, and soon it would change the fate of humanity itself. The decision was made in secret, though the world outside still did not know the truth. A small crew was chosen, brave but uncertain, their mission clear but dangerous. They would follow the strange signal, travel across the endless black, and find the voice that called to humanity. The pilot who had felt the widow's sorrow was among them, and his heart burned with quiet fire. The ship was not the largest, nor the most powerful, but it was fast, built for exploration. When the engines roared to life, the stars seemed to bend, and Earth became a fading memory. The crew sat in silence, each thinking of what might wait beyond. Was it a trap, a war, or truly a mother's desperate cry? Days turned into weeks, the stars outside the window changing like pages in a book. The signal grew stronger as they moved closer to its source. Each time the voice played, the pilot closed his eyes, feeling the weight of her sorrow. The children she spoke of haunted his dreams, small shadows waiting for someone to hold them. Finally, they reached the star system. It was not like the glowing worlds humans had hoped to find. It was broken, scarred by war, the planets dark and silent. Fragments of destroyed moons floated like bones in space, a graveyard without peace. The ship descended into the atmosphere of the signal's origin. A once great city stretched below, now in ruins, towers fallen, streets empty. The air was heavy with dust. the silence deep enough to press against their chests. The crew felt fear, yet the signal called them forward like a heartbeat guiding their steps. They walked through the ruins, their suits glowing faintly in the darkness. The pilot's voice trembled as he whispered, "She is here. I can feel it." And then they saw her. In the center of a broken square stood a figure, tall and thin, her skin marked with silver lines that shimmered in the weak light. Her eye, as glowed softly, but behind that glow was sorrow, as deep as the universe itself. Around her clung small figures, her children, their faces hidden, their tiny hands clutching her arms. The alien widow, the voice from the stars, was real. The crew froze, unsure, their training torn between fear and compassion, but the pilot stepped forward, his helmet off, his face open, his eyes wet with feeling. The widow lifted her head, and for the first time, her voice came not from machines, but from her own lips, trembling yet clear. "You came. Human. You heard me." Her children hid behind her legs, their eyes wide with both fear and hope. The pilot lowered himself to one knee, showing he meant no harm. "We heard you," he said softly. "We came because you called." Her body shook with emotion. "My mate, gone. My people, gone. Only my children remain. I cannot keep them safe." Her words were broken, but her meaning was sharp as a blade. She begged with her eyes, more than with her voice. The crew exchanged glances, doubt heavy in the air. Was this truth or was it danger in disguise? But the pilot felt no lie in her gaze, only a raw loneliness that mirrored his own. He stretched out a hand, not touching, only offering. The widow's children peeked out, their faces small and strange, yet innocent. One of them reached a trembling hand toward the pilot. For a moment, the fear of two species melted away, replaced by something older than war, older than stars. The simple need to be held, to be cared for. The widow lowered her head in gratitude, tears falling like liquid light. "You understand, human. You know what it means to lose." Her words pierced his chest, for he did know too well. In that moment he felt bound to her, to them, to a destiny he could not escape. Behind them, the ruined city groaned, the wind carrying echoes of battles long past. The crew's scanners showed the planet was unstable, resources fading, no future here. The widow knew it too, her time was running out. That was why she had sent her desperate cry into the dark, hoping someone, anyone, would answer. The pilot stood, his voice steady though his heart raced. "We will not leave you here alone," he promised. The other crew members hesitated, fear in their eyes, but they could not deny the truth they saw. This was not a trap. It was a plea, a wound in the universe waiting to be healed. As the ship prepared to lift again, the widow and her children stepped aboard. The pilot looked once more at the dying city below, a place of ghosts now left behind. But on this day, something new began, a fragile bond between worlds. He did not know what trials would come, what dangers waited in the shadows of space. But he knew this, the encounter was real, and it had changed everything. For the first time, humans were not alone, and loneliness itself had found an answer. The ship rose slowly from the ruins of the alien city, leaving behind the broken towers and the silence of a dying world. Inside the cabin, the crew sat tense, their eyes fixed on the strange family they had brought aboard. The alien widow held her children close, her long arms wrapped around them like a shield, her eyes glowing faintly, full of sorrow and caution. The children hid their faces, peeking out only when the human pilot spoke, his voice calm, steady, and warm. Hours passed before anyone spoke again. Finally, the pilot turned to her and said gently, "You called for us. Now you are here. Tell us your story." The widow closed her eyes, as if gathering the strength to open wounds that had never healed. When she spoke, her voice trembled but carried the weight of 1,000 battles. "My people once lived in light," she said. "We built great cities. We sang to the stars. We had families, dreams, peace." Her gaze grew distant, her eyes seeing memories instead of the cold cabin. "Then came the war," she whispered, her voice breaking. "A war of pride, of power, of foolish anger, and the sky burned." She described ships dark as shadows, filling the heavens, weapons that split planets, and battles that shook the ground. Her mate had been a fighter, brave and strong. His duty was to defend their home, but he never returned, his body lost in the smoke of war. Her words grew soft as her hand touched the smallest child at her side. He died before he could hold his youngest. The crew sat silent, the weight of her pain filling the room. Her story was not just about aliens. It was about love lost, about families broken, about the cruelty of war. It was something humans understood too well. The pilot lowered his head, remembering his own loss, the family he once had, the silence that had followed him for years. The widow continued, her voice trembling but steady. After the war, disease came, as if the stars themselves wanted us gone. She described sickness spreading across her people, a sickness no cure could stop. Children cried, parents wept, the air filled with grief until one by one her people fell. Her arms tightened around her children, pulling them closer. I buried friends, I buried family, I buried my sisters. I buried my brothers, she whispered, her tears glowing like liquid fire. In the end, only I remained, and these little ones, too young to fight, too small to survive alone. Her voice cracked, and for a long moment she could not speak. The pilot wanted to reach out, to comfort her, but he held back. He knew her sorrow needed space. Her silence was a language older than words. When she finally lifted her head, her eyes met his, and he saw not just pain, but a plea. I sent my voice into the dark because I had nothing left but hope, she said. Hope that someone would hear, hope that someone would care. The crew shifted uneasily, their doubts still alive. What if she was lying? What if her children carried danger? What if this was only the surface of something darker? But the pilot could not see lies in her story. Only a mother's desperation, only truth carved deep by suffering. And he knew, in that moment, that fate had chosen him to answer her call. The widow's children stirred, their eyes wide and strange but innocent. One of them touched the pilot's hand, their small fingers cold, yet trembling with trust. He smiled faintly, a smile he had not felt in years, and whispered, "You are safe now." The child leaned against him, and for the first time, the alien widow's face softened with fragile relief. The ship's commander cleared his throat, breaking the heavy silence. "We must decide what to do next," he said, his voice sharp. "This is no small matter. These children are not human. They could be dangerous. They could carry sickness. They could be weapons." Fear stirred in the crew, but the widow raised her head proudly, her voice strong despite her tears. "They are not weapons. They are not curses. They are children, my children, and they only want to live." The pilot looked around at his fellow humans, their faces hard with doubt, their eyes clouded by fear. Then he spoke, his voice steady and fierce. "If being human means anything, it means we do not turn away from those who need us." His words struck deep, and for a moment, even the commander could not reply. The widow bowed her head, her voice soft but clear. "You have hearts, you understand. Please take them, raise them, let them live." Her plea hung in the air like a fragile flame, and every member of the crew felt its heat. This was no longer just a mission, it was a test of humanity itself. As the ship carried them away from the ruined planet, the widow's story remained in their hearts, a story of love, of loss, of survival against impossible odds. And though the future was uncertain, one thing was clear. The widow's children were no longer alone, and neither was the human pilot who had chosen to listen. The ship drifted through the silent void, carrying not just its human crew, but also the alien widow and her children. Though the engines hummed softly, the true noise came from within, the sound of hearts clashing, of fears and hopes colliding. Every crew member felt the weight of the choice before them, and that weight grew heavier with each passing hour. The commander called for a meeting in the central chamber. The humans gathered in a circle, their faces tight, their eyes restless. At the far end, the alien widow sat with her children, her arms wrapped around them, her head bowed, as if she already knew she was on trial. The pilot stood close to her, silent but steady, his eyes never leaving her face. The commander's voice cut through the tense air. "We must speak honestly," he said. "These children are not human. We do not know what they carry inside them. They could be sick, they could be dangerous, they could be the end of us." He looked around, and several crew members nodded, fear plain on their faces. One scientist added, "Their biology is unknown. What if they spread something we cannot cure? What if their DNA reacts with ours in ways we cannot imagine?" The widow lifted her head slowly, her glowing eyes filled with pain but also dignity. "They are children," she said softly. "They are innocent. They are not weapons. They are not disease. They are my heart." Her words echoed in the chamber, but fear is a stubborn enemy, and fear whispered louder in some ears than compassion. The pilot stepped forward, his voice calm but strong. "We cannot turn our backs on them, not after what we have seen, not after hearing her story." But another crew member snapped back. "You let your emotions lead you. What if this is all a trick? What if she wants to bring destruction to Earth?" The room filled with angry voices, hope and doubt clashing like storms. The children shrank against their mother, their small eyes wide with confusion, their bodies trembling. They could not understand the words, but they understood the tone. The pilot knelt beside them, speaking gently. "It is all right. You are safe." One small child reached for his hand, and again the room fell into uneasy silence. The commander rubbed his forehead, his voice heavy with conflict. If we take them to Earth, there will be questions, there will be panic, people will not welcome them, they will fear them even more than we do now. He turned to the pilot. Do you not see? This choice could bring war, not peace. The pilot met his eyes, his own gaze steady. Or it could bring something greater than war, he said. It could bring understanding. It could show us what it truly means to be human. His words cut deep, for every heart in the chamber knew the truth of them, yet fear still clung to their minds like chains. The widow bowed her head again, her voice shaking but determined. If you cannot take me, then at least take them, she whispered. Let them live, even if I must stay behind, even if I must die alone. Her sacrifice, her willingness to give up everything for her children, struck the crew like a blade of light, for even in fear, no human could deny the power of a mother's love. The silence grew heavy, broken only by the steady hum of the ship. Some crew members looked away, ashamed of their doubts. Others clenched their fists, fighting against the voice of compassion that grew low. In their hearts, the pilot looked at the children, their small hands clutching each other, their eyes wide and searching, and he knew what his answer would always be. We cannot turn from them, he said, his voice now fierce. If we do, then we are no better than the war that destroyed her world. If we do, then we lose the right to call ourselves human. The commander said nothing, but his eyes softened, for even he could not fully resist the truth in those words. The moral weight pressed on everyone, not just as a decision for the ship, but for all of Earth, for all of humanity. As the debate ended, no final answer was given, only silence and the unspoken knowledge that a choice would soon be forced upon them. The widow sat quietly, holding her children, her glowing tears falling one by one. The pilot sat beside her, his hand resting near theirs, not touching, but promising. In that silence, a fragile bond was formed, stronger than fear, stronger than doubt. Outside the ship, the stars burned cold and endless, watching without judgment. Inside, humanity faced its own reflection, torn between fear and love, between survival and compassion. And though the final choice had not yet been spoken, the widow's story, her sacrifice, and her children's innocent eyes had already begun to change their hearts. The moral dilemma was not only about aliens or humans, it was about what it meant to care, what it meant to risk, what it meant to be alive. And though the road ahead was dark, one thing had become clear. No one aboard that ship would ever see the universe the same way again. The ship sailed through the darkness of space, carrying with it the fragile hope of the alien widow and her children. For a time, the crew thought the hardest struggle was behind them, but the universe is never quiet for long. Unseen eyes were already watching. Unseen enemies were already moving, drawn by the very same signal that had reached Earth. It began with a faint shadow on the radar, a flicker too small to notice at first, but the navigator frowned, her fingers tightening on the console. "Captain," she whispered, "something is following us." The crew gathered, their screens glowing with faint shapes moving in the distance, ships dark and sharp, hunting shadows. The widow's eyes widened as she saw the shapes, her breath catching in fear. "They are here," she whispered, her voice shaking, "the ones who ended my people, the ones who want my children." Her words froze the crew, every heart sinking at once. The hidden threat had revealed itself, and it was deadly, she explained quickly, her words trembling but fierce. "My children carry something inside them, something the enemies desire, a key written in their blood." The humans leaned closer, shocked. "What kind of key?" one asked. The widow lowered her head. "A genetic code. The last gift of my mate. It can awaken lost power. It can rebuild what was destroyed. It can also destroy again if placed in cruel hands." The room fell silent, the truth heavier than steel. The children were not just orphans of war. They were living treasures, carriers of hope and danger both. Now the crew understood why the enemies chased them, why the widow had begged so desperately. Her children were the last spark of her people's future. The commander clenched his fists, his voice sharp. "Then we cannot let them fall into enemy hands, but we also cannot risk leading these ships back to Earth." Fear rippled through the crew again, but the pilot stood tall, his eyes burning. "Then we fight, we protect them, whatever the cost." The widow turned to him, her eyes shining. "You would risk your life for them?" she asked, her voice breaking. The pilot nodded, steady as stone. "I already have." For he knew deep in his heart that protecting these children was no longer a choice. It was his destiny. The enemy ships grew closer, their engines humming like predators circling prey. The crew worked quickly, setting shields, preparing weapons, though their ship was small compared to the hunters that followed. The widow knelt with her children, whispering soft words in her language, words of comfort, words of courage. The pilot watched her, knowing she was ready to fight to her last breath. Moments later, the first attack came, a flash of light, a beam slicing across the darkness, shaking the human ship. Alarms screamed, lights flickered, fear spread like fire. The commander shouted orders. Shields up, evasive maneuvers, return fire. The crew moved with desperate speed, their hands trembling but determined. The children cried softly, clutching their mother, their eyes wide with terror. The pilot rushed to them, kneeling down. "Do not be afraid," he said. "We will keep you safe." His voice was steady, though inside his heart pounded like thunder, for he knew the enemy would not stop, not until the children were theirs. The widow rose, her face fierce now, no longer only sorrow but fire. "They will not have them," she said, "even if I must give my life." She moved to the control station, her hands glowing faintly, her strange alien knowledge flowing into the human machines. The ship responded, systems strengthening, weapons burning brighter. The humans stared in awe as their simple vessel became stronger under her touch. For the first time, they saw not just a widow in pain, but a warrior, a mother ready to fight the universe itself. Her children watched her with wide eyes, their fear turning slowly into fragile hope. The pilot stood beside her, his voice firm. "Then we fight together." The battle raged on, beams of light crossing the void, explosions shaking the stars. The enemy pressed harder, more ships arriving, the odds stacked higher, but the humans and the widow fought side by side, their courage binding them like steel. Every moment felt like the end, yet every heartbeat carried them forward. In the chaos, the pilot caught sight of one child standing tall, their small hand glowing faintly with the same light as their mother. The widow gasped. "It has begun," she whispered. "Their gift is awakening." The crew looked on in shock, unsure if this gift was salvation or danger, but in that moment, it gave them strength, for hope itself had joined the fight. The enemy pulled back, regrouping, their shadows slipping into the distance for now. The ship floated, damaged but alive, the crew breathing hard, their bodies trembling with both fear and relief. The widow sank to her knees, pulling her children close, tears glowing on her face. "They will come again," she whispered. "They will never stop, not until they take them." The crew exchanged looks, the weight of their choice now even heavier. The pilot placed his hand on the child's shoulder, his voice steady. "Then we will never stop either. As long as we breathe, they will not have you." The widow lifted her eyes, and for the first time since her world had fallen, she allowed herself to believe in hope. But in the darkness beyond the stars, the hidden threat was not gone, only waiting. And the crew knew the true battle had only just begun. The ship floated wounded in the endless dark, its shields cracked, its metal skin scorched by enemy fire. Inside, the crew worked tirelessly, repairing wires, patching holes, whispering silent prayers. The children huddled near their mother, their glowing eyes wide with fear, their small hands clutching one another, and the widow sat among them, her face pale, her breath shallow, though she tried to hide her weakness. The pilot noticed it first, the way her hands trembled, the way her shoulders shook. He knelt beside her, his voice soft. "You are hurt." She shook her head slowly, forcing a faint smile. "Not hurt, only fading. My body has carried too much sorrow, too much war. I cannot last much longer." The words struck him like a blade, for though he had feared this truth, hearing it from her lips tore his heart apart. The commander overheard, his eyes narrowing. "What do you mean, fading?" The widow turned her gaze toward him, calm and unafraid. "My people were not built to survive alone. When my mate fell, when my kin died, my body began to weaken. My life is nearly done." Her children gasped, their small voices crying out in their own language, their fear sharper than any weapon. The pilot placed a hand on the widow's shoulder, his voice breaking. "No, you cannot leave them. They need you." Her eyes glistened with tears, yet her smile was soft. "They will need someone, yes, but it does not have to be me. It can be you." Her words shook him to the core, for he understood her meaning. She was already preparing to pass her children into his care. The crew fell silent, the weight of her words crushing them. The widow's voice grew stronger, though her body trembled. "My children carry the key, the last seed of my people. If the enemy takes them, it will be the end of all hope. But if they live, if they are raised with love, then my people will live again through them." Her eyes turned to the pilot, fierce and pleading. "Promise me, human, promise you will protect them." Before he could answer, alarms screamed once more, the radar flashing red. The enemy had returned, larger and more relentless than before. The ship shook violently as beams of fire struck its hull. Sparks rained down. The crew shouted in panic. The widow now rose slowly, her body weak but her spirit blazing. "It is time," she whispered. "I will give everything." She walked to the control core, her children crying out, clinging to her arms. "Mother, no," they whimpered, their voices filled with terror. She touched their faces gently, her tears glowing as they fell. "Do not fear, my little ones. You will live. You will see stars I will never see." Her voice cracked, yet her hands were steady as she pried their fingers from her arms and placed them in the pilot's hands. The pilot's eyes filled with fire. "You do not need to do this," he begged, but she shook her head, her glowing eyes shining with fierce love. "I was born for them. I lived for them. And now I will die for them. This is the way of a mother." Her body began to glow brighter, light pulsing from her chest, flowing into the ship's systems. The crew gasped as the ship came alive, power surging, shields rebuilding, weapons glowing with new strength. The widow's life force poured into the vessel, merging her essence with human technology, turning weakness into fire. The enemy ships closed in, firing beam after beam, but now the human ship stood firm, glowing like a star in the darkness. The commander shouted, "Fire!" and the ship answered with blinding light, cutting through enemy hulls, scattering them into the void, but the price was heavy. The widow staggered, her body fading, her light dimming as she gave all that remained of her soul. The pilot held her trembling hands, tears streaming down his face. "Stay with us, please. You cannot leave them." Her voice was a whisper now, soft as a breeze. "They will not be alone, because they have you." The children screamed, clutching at her legs, their tears glowing, their voices breaking the hearts of all who heard. The widow smiled faintly, her glowing hand brushing each child's face one last time. "Live, my little ones, live for me, live for him, live for tomorrow." Her light grew brighter, filling the chamber, filling the crew with warmth and sorrow, and then, with a final cry that was both pain and love, her body dissolved into radiant light. The glow rushed into the ship, sealing the last cracks, powering the final strike that shattered the enemy fleet. The silence that followed was deep, broken only by the sobs of her children and the steady hum of the living ship she had become. The pilot held the children close, his own tears falling freely. He whispered into the quiet, his voice trembling but firm. "I promise I will keep them safe. I will raise them as my own." The commander bowed his head. The crew fell silent, for they all knew a great soul had left them. The alien widow had given her life, her love, her very being, to protect her children and to trust humanity. And though her body was gone, her presence filled the ship. Her sacrifice burned in their hearts. From that moment on, the pilot was no longer alone. The children were no longer orphans. A new family had been born in the fire of loss, bound by a promise stronger than death. The stars outside glittered cold, but inside the ship, love burned like a flame that would never die. The battlefield was silent at last. The enemy ships shattered and scattered like ashes in the void. The human vessel drifted through the stars, alive but forever changed, its metal walls glowing faintly with the light the widow had given. Her sacrifice lingered everywhere, in the hum of the engines, in the glow of the controls, in the very air the crew breathed. But most of all, it lingered in the hearts of her children, who now clung to the human pilot as if he were their only anchor in the universe. The crew moved quietly, their faces solemn, for they had witnessed something greater than war. They had seen love stronger than fear, sacrifice greater than power. No one spoke of victory, for it did not feel like victory, it felt like survival. Elle bought at a painful price, and yet within that pain, a fragile seed of hope had taken root. The children cried themselves to sleep in the pilot's arms, their small bodies trembling with grief. He held them close, whispering soft words, promising them again and again, "You are safe now, I will never leave you." His own tears fell silently, but for the first time in years, his tears were not only for loss, they were also for love. He had lost his family once, but now the universe had placed a new family in his hands. The commander stood at the viewing window, staring at the stars. "What do we tell Earth?" he asked quietly. "What will they say when we bring these children home?" Fear still lingered, fear of panic, fear of rejection, fear of war. But the pilot answered with a steady voice, "We tell them the truth, that a mother gave her life for love, and that we are chosen to honor that love." Days passed as the ship traveled back toward Earth. The children grew quieter, watching everything with wide, glowing eyes. They did not understand every human word, but they understood kindness. They understood comfort. And each time the pilot smiled at them, each time he held their hands, a little piece of their fear melted away. At night, when the stars filled the windows, the pilot would whisper stories. He told them about oceans that touched the sky, about forests where the wind sang, about fields where children ran barefoot under the sun. The widow's children listened in silence, their eyes shining, as if trying to paint these pictures in their minds. For them, Earth was no longer just a planet, it was a promise, a dream waiting to be real. When at last the blue sphere of Earth came into view, the crew fell silent. Home looked both familiar and strange, for they had left as explorers, but they returned as guardians of something far greater. The widow's voice seemed to echo in the pilot's memory. "Promise me, human," and he whispered back to the stars, "I have key. Eat my promise." The landing was not easy. The governments demanded answers, scientists crowded with questions, soldiers with suspicion. The crew stood before them carrying the children, while whispers filled the air. Are they dangerous? Are they safe? Should they be hidden? Should they be studied? But the pilot raised his voice, strong and unwavering. "To be human," he said, "is not only to fear, it is to love beyond ourselves. These children are not weapons, they are not curses. They are living proof that even across the stars, family and love are the same. Their mother gave her life to protect them, and now it is our duty to continue her wish." His words spread like fire, burning through doubt, stirring hearts that had grown cold. Some still resisted, but many felt the truth, for in their eyes they saw not aliens, but children, lost and afraid, longing only for a home. The widow's story began to move across the world, told in whispers, then in shouts, then in songs. Her final wish became more than a secret. It became a call for all of humanity. The children were given a place to live, a place where they could grow without fear. They ran in fields for the first time, laughed under the sun for the first time, touched rivers and forests and skies their mother had only dreamed for them. The pilot walked beside them, sometimes as a guardian, sometimes as a father, always as the man who had chosen not to turn away. And though the pain of loss never vanished, joy began to bloom in its place. At night, when the stars shone above Earth, the children would look up and whisper to their mother. They would whisper thanks, they would whisper love, they would whisper promises of their own. The pilot would stand beside them, silent, knowing she was listening, knowing her light still burned in every star. And in those moments, loneliness no longer ruled the universe, for the widow's sacrifice had done more than save her children. It had changed humanity. It had reminded them of the power of compassion, of the strength found in caring for others. Nations began to speak of unity. Scientists began to dream of peace. Ordinary people began to believe that the stars might hold friends, not only enemies, and all of it had begun with a single broken voice crying into the dark. The pilot sat one evening, the children curled asleep beside him. He looked at their peaceful faces, glowing faintly in the moonlight. He remembered the silence of space, the fire of battle, the light of her sacrifice, and he whispered softly, "You are not alone anymore, and neither am I." The stars continued to burn above, cold and endless. But within the hearts of humans and aliens alike, a new fire had been born. Not the fire of war, but the fire of family, of hope, of love. And that fire promised that the widow's wish would never be forgotten.